Good morning, everybody. The Netflix documentary, Making a Murderer, is 20 one-hour episodes. A huge volume of work. The first 10 episodes took the filmmakers from 2005 till its release in 2015 to film it, edit it, and make it the documentary that it is. They then added another 10 one-hour episodes. And the advantage, of course, of that is it allows us, through the documentary, to delve into the intricacies of the case. And as for many in the Making a Murderer community, our, for want of a better word, mentor, Echols, and yesterday, Steve Drizzen, mentioned the line that information is power. Information that you can use so that if you're in any kind of debate with somebody, you can say, well, in actual fact, this is the case and this is what happened. And you can be specific about certain things, particularly when people try and use their own cognitive dissonance to influence others. As I say, it does allow us to, the information that we gather can be used in any kind of respectful debate, but to be able to forcefully say to somebody, no, you're wrong, this is the case, because you have that information at hand. Obviously, the one of the things that features prominently in the coverage of Luke's pursuit, the pursuit of Luke by the media, was this idea that he was a Satan worshipper, that he was a satanic person. And he's not the only one that's ever had that accusation pointed at him. Probably, if you want to do comparisons, probably Damien Echols of the West Memphis 3 is one of the best comparisons that one can make. And so what I've done is I'm going to pop the link to this article in the description below so that you can read it in full. It's a very long article. I'm just going to read the bit that deals with the sensationalizing Satanism. I say this applies to Damien Echols and Luke Mitchell just as equally. As I say, information, it's power. So starting off then, the widespread belief that Satan was real and working evil in the world did not come out of nowhere. In 1972, Pope St. Paul VI had warned that Satan was indeed real in a speech called Confronting the Devil's Power. In the rider culture, the 1970s had seen a big resurgence in horror novels and movies starring Satan himself. First came Rosemary's Baby in 1967, a little tale about an innocent housewife impregnated with the seed of Satan. It was so popular, the film rights sold before the book was even published. Then The Exorcist, a Baroque novel about a modern case of demon possession, made the New York Times bestseller list in 1971 and stayed on it for 55 weeks. It sold 4 million copies when it was adapted to film in 1973. Those two books alone spawned dozens of imitations. Satan, demons, and devil worshippers packed the bookshelves for years afterwards. Then in 1976, The Omen terrified movie audiences with the story of Satan's son wreaking havoc here on earth. So by 1980, the American zeitgeist had been primed for Satan's big comeback. But there were other, darker forces at work in creating the Satanic panic. In 1980, the newly formed moral majority, which in reality was neither, led by tele-evangelist Jerry Falwell Sr., began flexing their muscles, electing Hollywood actor Ronald Reagan to the presidency. The satanic panic was like manna to the religious right. It proved that the devil was real and therefore propped up their warning cultural authority. With its shocking claims of dark rituals and sadistic sexual abuse, the satanic panic appealed to another relatively new and powerful phenomenon in the 80s, tabloid TV, the pre-internet version of fake news. Tabloid TV thrived on violence and sensationalism, and it was ubiquitous at a time when, for the first time in history, the majority of American households had a TV. Between 1985 and 89, TV hosts Geraldo Rivera, Oprah Winfrey, Sally, Jesse, Raphael, and Larry King aired a total of 8 shows about devil worship and witchcraft. But perhaps the most memorable of these was Geraldo's 1988 special, Devil Worship, Exposing Satan's Underground. It was given a special evening time slot only a few days before Halloween, and it was the highest rated 2-hour special that NBC ever aired. Of course, it was just the kind of level-headed, truthful journalism you'd expect from Geraldo Rivera in the 80s, as he flitted from clergy members to alleged victims to cops, all with a befuddled Ozzy Osbourne looking down from a TV screen. This feedback loop between the moralizing right and the tabloid media created, and was in turn created by, a number of self-styled experts who made careers for themselves as consultants and speakers. Michelle Smith and Lawrence Padset, after leaving their respective spouses and marrying each other, became celebrities, going on a cross-country promotional tour and landing on the covers of People magazine and the National Enquirer. Others, such as Bob Larson, Gordon Coulter, Dale Griffiths, who testified at Echols' trial, and numerous others, made their fame the pre-internet way, distributing photocopied pamphlets and copied VHS tapes, hosting AM radio shows, and travelling around the country speaking to church groups, parent-teacher associations, and even, in the case of Griffiths, law enforcement. Many of these experts claimed to have once been high-ranking witches and satanic priests who later became saved. Their message was the same: dire warnings about the dangers of apparently numerous satanic cults roaming the country, abducting and killing children, using dungeons and dragons and heavy metal music to recruit more followers. But the first place where they found their victims, according to the experts, was in the one place no one would expect to find Satanists: the devils in the daycare. In the 1970s and 80s, more and more mothers were working outside the home and leaving their kids in daycare, already a source of anxiety for many working mums. The moral majority saw this as, at best, a sad symptom of the breakdown of the traditional family, at worst, an unforgivable act of selfishness that destroyed children's spirits, all so some ball-crushing feminist could muscle in on men's territory. So it's no surprise that the first victims of the satanic panic were the owners of the McMartin preschool in Manhattan Beach, California in 1983. One parent, Jody Johnson, an alcoholic with a history of mental illness, who was going through an ugly divorce, claimed that her son had been sodomized by a teacher there. Investigators, seeking more evidence, sent letters to 200 parents accusing the McMartin family of a number of sexual abuses. Needless to say, the parents went into a panic, and the McMartin family's guilt was cemented in the public's minds. The children were sent to Key McFarlane, who was not a licensed psychologist, to be interviewed. McFarlane used controversial and discredited methods to get the children to reveal yucky secrets. Transcripts and tapes later showed that her questions led the children to tell her what she wanted to hear, and she would not accept their answers when they told her that the teachers had done nothing wrong. It was the longest and most expensive trial in American history. After 3 years, the McMartins were eventually acquitted, but not until their business and lives had been destroyed. Despite the fact that the McMartins were acquitted, the moral majority continued pushing the myth that daycares were potential slaughterhouses full of child-abusing, satanic paedophiles. Before the decade was over 100 more preschools and daycares across the country were accused of similar abuses. But the satanic panic would not be confined to ruining the lives of innocent childcare workers. The religious right saw the devil everywhere, especially in the games and music enjoyed by bookish loners, kids like Echols and Luke Mitchell and the humble author of this article. In 1981, Rona Jaffe wrote Mazes and Monsters, a ridiculously fictionalized story based very loosely on the disappearance and, later, suicide of James Dallas Egbert. He was a troubled college student who at one point played Dungeons and Dragons. The book claimed Dungeons and Dragons, or as we call it from now on, D&D, somehow drove Egbert insane, unable to differentiate between the game and reality, causing him to kill himself. A year later, it was made into a cheesy, made-for-TV movie starring Tom Hanks. A year after that, in 1983, Patricia Pulling blamed D&D for her son's suicide and formed Bothered About D&D, B-A-D-D, using ridiculous, trumped-up scare tactics, including the Mazes and Monsters movie. Bad, as it was called, successfully lobbied to have D&D kicked out of public schools across the country. Some schools went so far as to punish students for even bringing D&D books or dice into school grounds. At the same time Mazes and Monsters hit the bookshelves, Christian DJ Michael Mills began touring America, warning Christians about backmasking or backwards subliminal messages hidden in rock music. The following year, Minister Jacob Aranza wrote Backward Masking, Unmasked and wrote Backward Masking Unmasked and sparked a number of community organizations and pastors, most notably Gary Greenwald, to come out against the evils of rock music. One such group was the Parents Music Resource Center, the PMRC, headed by Al Gore's wife, Tipper Gore. While the PMRC avoided directly accusing rock music of being a conduit for Satan, they did object to what they saw as obscene or blasphemous cover art and lyrics, and successfully lobbied Congress to affix parental warning labels on albums. Many stores, including Walmart, refused even to carry albums with the parental warning label. The charges against D&D and rock music were the same: that they would drive the players' listeners crazy and or somehow manipulate them into worshipping Satan, inevitably killing themselves and or other people. In 1986, Ozzy Osbourne was actually brought to court by the mother of John McCollum, who killed himself under the supposed influence of Ozzy's music. The charges were dropped. Judas Priest found themselves charged with the same thing 4 years later and were found not guilty. And let's not forget another group targeted by the religious right: Wiccans, pagans, druids, and anyone dabbling in New Age or occult practices. Many of these beliefs had gotten pop culture chic in the 60s and 70s, and the number of actual practitioners continued to rise in the 80s. But according to pastors, priests, and various occult experts of the time, anything remotely associated with these beliefs was deemed satanic. The pentagram, the symbol of Wicca, altars used by nearly all neo-pagan and indigenous religions, candles, again used by a variety of religions, and books on any of these topics were proof of Satanism. In fact, it was Echols' interest in the occult that was used as evidence that he was responsible for murdering the 3 boys. By the end of the decade, satanic ritual abuse was widely accepted as fact. Law enforcement training materials claimed upwards of 60,000 people were killed every year by Satanists. And note that this is 3 times the number of all reported homicides in a year. Yet as more and more hysterical claims began piling up and still no evidence was being found, people began to question the belief that there was a vast network of Satanists abducting, abusing and killing thousands of children. So in 1990, a journalist for the Mail on Sunday decided to investigate the claims in Michelle Remembers. She found not one person who could corroborate anything in the book. In fact, many of Smith's memories were demonstrably false. At one point, the technique Padser and others had used to help victims recover their memories of abuse was condemned as unethical and leading by psychologists. Now, recovered memory therapy is not listed in DSM. That is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Diseases, and is not endorsed by mainstream ethical and professional mental health associations. In 1992, a year before the West Memphis murders, Kenneth Lanning, a supervisory special agent with the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, researched hundreds of cases of alleged satanic ritual abuse. His monograph, published by the Department of Justice, irrefutably debunked the myth of systemic ritualistic occult abuse in America. As more psychologists, sociologists and journalists began to debunk the claims made by dubious occult experts and alleged victims, it became clear America had been hoaxed. The satanic panic eventually collapsed under the weight of its own ridiculousness, but not after 3 teens in West Memphis were convicted of murder. Fortunately, the West Memphis 3 did see justice in the end. Documentaries, books, and tireless activism, including by celebrities, shone a light on their case. Thanks to new evidence uncovered by a private detective, the state of Arkansas allowed the 3 to take an Alford plea on August the 19th, 2011. The Alford plea, I can best describe it as being, it's not too dissimilar to the idea that in a jury trial in Scotland, we have guilty, not guilty, and not proven. And it's kind of like a variation on that, where somebody found not proven gets to walk free, but always has that stigma. The Alford plea is the same. While this plea means the case remains closed and the 3 are still left with murder convictions on their records, they at least got their freedom. Jesse Miskelly returned home to live with his family and, understandably, stays out of the media. Mott Baldwin moved to Seattle and is working hard to build a new life for himself. Damien Echols moved first to Salem, Massachusetts, then New York with his wife, where he continues to advocate for the abolition of the death penalty. He creates occult artwork and writes books. His latest, High Magic, spelt with a CK at the end, is a primer on ceremonial magic. But like any good horror monster, there is the threat that the satanic panic might rise again. And it certainly did in Luke's case. With the spread of fake news on social media, coupled with the resurgence of the religious right, the conditions are ripe for a resurrection. The Pizzagate incident, which also claimed the existence of an underground child sexual abuse ring, just without the robes and candles, may have been the first warning shot. I hope what we learned last time round will be enough to keep this particular monster in its grave for good. Okay, hope you found that interesting. As I say, the way that the press wanted to use this, Luke's interest in the devil as a well, they tried to present it, didn't they, as this huge motive. You know, even Luke himself says, you know, I was the local weirdo. But I think it's very important to look at this whole satanic panic, as it's called. As I say, I'll drop the link below in the description so you can read it through. It's a very long article, but very interesting. And it was written, I believe, just 2 years ago, 2019, when, of course, Murder in a Small Town was being filmed and put together. Anyway, take care, and we'll see you all again soon. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.